Welcome back, and thank you for coming for the second half of this. We did cover some incredible stuff in the first half, and I, as always, every time I talk to Professor Nicolson, learned a huge amount again. Now we're going to move to another very, very important reason at the cause of holding back our mental capacity, our mental strength, mental resilience, because of events that have happened in the past, traumatic events that have caused PTSD, that have caused triggers. So let's delve right into it. Professor Nicolson, thank you for being part of this, and thank you for teaching me so much. Let's share it with a wider audience. There's another big reason our cognitive ability is held back, is reduced, and it's to do with events that have happened in the past that the brain couldn't make sense of. So it's left us with triggers. It's left us with PTSD. This is a big, big topic. Can you start to unscramble that for us, please?
Well, it is a big topic. It's slightly further away from my area of expertise, but in the previous session, I did go through slightly the effect of stress on cognitive performance. And if I could just sort of refresh the analogy I did at the time, the brain is a living organism. In order for it to learn things and to get the neuroplasticity, and it's important that it has the appropriate circumstances in place, the right nutrients, and in a sense, a growth mindset where it feels able to improve. The problem with stress is it's more like frost on that garden. It takes all of that growth out of it, and essentially puts you back on your primary resources, taking the blood out of the cognitive circuitry into the muscles of the periphery, and therefore it prevents any plasticity processes happening. And of course, we're all stressed at various times, and that's one of the major reasons that people think that they have a fixed mindset. They think that they can't improve at all. But you did ask about the more specific sort of traumatic stress, which does have an even more serious effect, especially you could have trauma in a single episode, or you could have trauma of maybe more minor over a longer period. So someone coming back from, shall I say, a tour in Afghanistan might well have some specific traumatic episodes, but a dyslexic child being sort of, in a sense, failing at school and being told that they're stupid time and time again, that's another traumatic incident. And we will all have had traumatic incidents of that type throughout our childhood and our adulthood. And the question is whether they are actually so adverse as to affect our processing, or whether we get by, but while being able to ignore them.
So these traumatic experiences, don't they leave triggers that are created at the time of the stress, which become they kind of like become alarm system triggers, and they set off this alarm system, which puts you into a totally different state mentally.
Well, very much so. For me, with the karaoke would be, oh no. For many dyslexic children, of course, it'd be having the thought of having to read aloud. And for many people with PTSD, it's possibly some sort of auditory stimulus that sounds a bit like the situation they're in when it first happened.
So what? How are these triggers created? What happens in the brain during a traumatic experience?
What happens? The brain is designed to sort of soak up the environment you're in,
right,
and to then associate it with whatever you learned at that time. If it is a traumatic incident that happens to you, then it will associate that environment, and then some sort of cue from that environment sounds a bit the same, will automatically trigger that. I mean, the standard thing that we talk about in the case of memory is that you might have an aniseed smell or something, and that smell will then trigger, oh yes, I was walking through that meadow when I was 12, sort of thing.
I have it with the smell of a dentist.
Oh, really? Yes, that mouthwash.
If I smell that in some other sphere, I'm back in the dentist's chair with the drill going.
Oh, right. I mean, it can be a trigger for positive memories as well.
Right. Okay.
But obviously the ones for negative memories
Stronger.
can be much stronger, because you can have some very strong negative memories. Yes. So that's the sort of, and that's how the brain works, by associating all of the external stimuli at that time to make a memory.
So if the stimuli at the time of the traumatic event, say someone was in Afghanistan and an explosion happened, is it all of the sensory information that they had at the time? Is that what links to the alarm system?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. And so in a sense, your alarm system has become hyperactive.
Yeah.
You're always going around just checking there's no one breaking in.
And if anything correlates with an event before that was life-threatening, it sets your alarm off. And then what happens?
It sets your alarm off. Well, you will, in a sense, relive those memories to some greater or lesser extent.
And it puts you in hypervigilance.
And that's an automatic process that occurs well below the level of consciousness that you cannot do anything about.
Right. Yeah.
And it's all very well saying, doing some cognitive behavioral therapy, but that's aiming at a slightly higher level. You can say, and you cannot actually prevent those low-level automatic processes occurring.
So cognitive behavioral therapy, that's kind of operating in the thinking part of the brain, but what you're describing is happening in the unconscious.
Exactly. It's happening well before you can get to the thinking part of the brain.
Yeah, and that the unconscious part of the brain works infinitely faster than the conscious part. So
it's designed to do so.
So control has been handed over before you've been able to think about, is this really serious? Yes or no?
Yes.
So a friend of mine, he served in various war zones. When a balloon goes off, he cannot help. He's on the floor. He's lying on the floor. He's hopeless for the next hour or two.
Yes.
Poor chap.
Yes, well, it is this automatic process that, you've been trained in the sense to hear the gunfire and get down on the floor.
Yeah.
And it is what it is.
Now, isn't that the reptilian part of the brain that takes over in that situation?
I mean, that fight, flight, or freeze is the reptilian brain. Yes, it's designed to do that.
Yeah.
And it has learned to do that. But we, in a sense, have ourselves managed to sort of almost hardwire that response into it through that automatization process.
Yeah. So someone that's been triggered, it's almost as if key parts of their brain are not available to them for that time, because all of the emphasis has been put on survival.
Well, if you were to mention karaoke to me.
I don't think you like karaoke somehow.
How do you pick that up? If you were to mention karaoke to me, then what actually happens is that then karaoke then triggers a whole range of adverse experiences from my youth.
But hardly life-threatening.
I hope not. But nonetheless sort of ego-threatening. These were... normally I did pretty well at stuff, but I was rubbish at the karaoke. And therefore, it's for other people, I mean, I was good at maths. For other people, you'll see an equation on the page.
Right.
And a lot of my academic friends, they see an equation on the page, they'll turn to the next page.
Yeah.
It's like a snake to them. So everyone has learned through their experiences to have some snakes.
Well, I've talked to a lot of I've talked to a lot of people who, because they struggled at school with reading, there was a massive amount of shame associated with reading out loud in class and being seen not to be able to read. Or I'd got a friend, and he was an adult, a very famous guy, in fact. In a restaurant, he couldn't read, but he always had an excuse. He didn't have his glasses or something. He'd got someone else to read the menu to him. So even though he was famous and hugely successful as a sportsman, in the sphere where it was going to be obvious that he couldn't read, the shame of that was so painful. And it sounds like for you, there's kind of shame associated with...
No problem with karaoke for me.
Yeah, exactly. So shame is a big one.
No, that's a really good point, Wynford. We've talked about stress.
Yeah.
But we're sort of pack animals.
Yeah.
And shame is the way that you keep your pack in place.
Yeah.
And so, and shame is a very, very powerful thing. And in fact, shame is possibly the the only method teachers have these days of actually keeping any order in their class. And shame is very, very, very bad for us.
So a teacher trying to shame a child is doing far more harm than we realize.
There's a risk of that, yes.
Wow, that's scary. Well, in another sphere, people that have been abused sexually for whatever reason, if they've been raped or abused by some member of their family or whatever it is, they often bury that.
Yeah.
The shame of facing that is so great. They sometimes bury it. I came across a lady recently in her 60s, never ever talked about it the whole of her life because the shame of bringing it up was too great for her. It wasn't her fault. She was absolutely innocent at the time. But nevertheless, that shame was a powerful deterrent for her facing that.
There's something very powerful about shame that does cause, in a sense, the trauma in the self. When I talked in the earlier session about that mental abscess, the mental abscess and the shame are very much linked.
So we don't tend to use the word trauma associated with things that can cause shame, but it sounds like it does. I mean, I use the word trauma in the neuroscience sense, where it's anything that creates a permanent trigger within the brain that can go off without warning. But it's any adverse experience. So if I use the word trauma, forgive me, I'm just talking about adverse experiences. Whenever the brain can't predict the outcome, it causes the creation of a trigger, or generally causes the creation of a trigger.
Yes, I think probably shame and traumatic episode. I mean, it may be that you're not particularly shamed by the episode, but a lot of the time you are. So a lot of the things in shall we say, Afghanistan, there'll be an element of shame there because they weren't able to save their friends or whatever.
Yeah. Some feel guilty about being alive themselves when their friends were tragically lost.
Yes. So it's quite likely that shame is at the heart of a lot of this stuff.
Wow, I'd never thought of that. So we've got all of these causes of the creation of triggers which can go off without warning. The brain hands over control to the reptilian part of the brain, and we go into various different stages of fight, flight, freeze, fawn, faint, whatever it is. And at that point, the brain's parts of the brain are not available to us. What we know, actually, this isn't a risky situation. Yes, it may have happened in the past, but there's no risk. That means nothing. And you hear of people having panic attacks being told, it's all right, there's not a problem, or pull yourself together.
It always works nicer that way.
Yeah, they don't have access to that part of the brain at that time.
No, exactly. It's at a lower level that the problem arises.
So it's in the deep part of our brain, in our unconscious mind. And what you've been teaching me, and I remember clearly the conversation we had, which was so exciting, I didn't sleep for days, when you told me that the work that we've been doing on the creation of neuroplasticity at any age could well be vital and valuable in helping rewire, reprogram, reset these triggers so they didn't have the same impact. Can you talk us through that?
There's a very well-established principle in memory research, which says that we have situation-specific memory and we have state-specific memory. So, for instance, if you've been having a fair bit to drink, then your mental state is different, and therefore you might not remember things when you become sober, but when you've had more to drink again, you'll remember what happened last time. Similarly, when you're depressed, you'll have various bad memories. And then when you're no longer depressed, you won't remember those. And then when you get depressed again, you'll remember all of the bad things that happened to you last time you were depressed. And so, I mean, of course, there are positives. When you're feeling cheerful, you just remember when you were cheerful. So it's that state-dependent memory. So when you're feeling stressed, you remember all the things that happened to you last time you were stressed.
Wow.
And similarly, if you're having drugs, then you'll remember what happened then. And so the brain is designed to respond to the situation it was in last time. And because the chances are that whatever it learned last time in that situation will be useful to you.
Right. So it's like a complete memory recall with
yes,
all of the feelings, the emotions, the attitudes are all kind of recreated at that moment.
Yes. But if somehow you can change the way that the brain is actually, the brain state,
Yeah.
making, shall we say, slight rewiring, for instance, of the brain,
Yeah.
then that will mean that the previously traumatic memories will no longer be quite so potent
Yeah.
in reminding you of them,
Yeah.
because the brain state has changed.
Yeah.
And so if you learn something new,
Yeah.
then it might well be helpful.
Yeah. Another wonderful conversation I had with you was around how we can press the reset button on these very triggers. And we had a long discussion about various interventions that exist, how much research there was, what were effective, what wasn't effective. We started focusing on things that operate on the unconscious mind, because as you're now saying, that's where the problem lies. And we focused increasingly on bilateral stimulation, or different types of bilateral stimulation, and particularly on the principles of EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, because the best research that was around at the time was that these were the most powerful tools to press the reset button, to start to break the connections that existed between a traumatic situation and the risk that there was to your life or whatever. Can you talk us through that, and particularly how neuroplasticity potentially increases the impact of these interventions and takes them to a new level?
It's a huge area.
I know, but it's exciting. There's a lot of people struggling with this. A lot of people have anxiety. You know, the number of people on antidepressants and anti-anxiety drugs, and the number of people thinking of suicide. The number of suicides is scary. They've gone up like 60% in the last 10 years. These are big issues for people, and they're just wishing that there was something could be done. And very often they've tried all sorts of things, but my hunch is that what you're talking about now is a new level of hope that should get us excited about possible interventions.
Well, EMDR was introduced by Shapiro 30-odd years ago.
Yeah.
And is, I think, probably one of the few non-pharmacological approved approaches for PTSD.
Yeah.
And I've actually, I've had the benefit of working with one of my colleagues at Edge Hill University, has actually worked with sex offenders as well with the EMDR. I mean, in a nutshell, I mean, I'm hopelessly oversimplifying, but the EMDR technique is typically you'll have eight parts to a session, where in the first part you'll put the client at rest. You'll find that, in a sense, what their safe place is. And then a core part of it is halfway through the session, you'll either have bilateral stimulation, where you might get them to do something like this, or more likely you'll get them to follow the therapist's hand as they do this.
Yeah.
And then you'll associate that with the safe place and with the traumatic experience.
Right. Yeah.
And then you'll then have further sessions, making sure that because this often then causes significant distress to them, and then you'll be able to then get that distress to get rid of it, and then and typically over 2 or 3 sessions, that traumatic experience will no longer have the power that it had to take over their processing.
So you're breaking the connection of the alarm system and plugging it back into an okay memory. This is not linked to a threat. This is actually linked to it.
That appears to be the way that it's working. Yes.
Yeah.
And EMDR is now has been shown to be a benefit, obviously, for PTSD, but also for things like depression, and therefore probably for various childhood traumas, adverse experiences of all sorts. I think this can be beneficial. And the colleague of mine working with a sex offender said even 1 or 2 sessions actually seem to have an amazing effect and made him really just if he felt for the first time he was actually making progress with them.
Wow.
This is in prisons. And this is what we find, I think, talking to many people. They don't know exactly how it works, but it does work, which is, in a sense, the opposite of most things in life. And so you asked me, how is it thought that it works? There are various hypotheses. One is the REM sleep hypothesis.
Oh, yes.
Because when you get into the deep levels of sleep, there's the deep sleep and then there's the REM sleep, the rapid eye movement sleep. And it's thought that this sort of thing might be sort of like a situation when you have the REM sleep, and somehow that's allowing you to deconsolidate those previous memories and somehow to get them so they're not so important.
Well, we know that REM sleep is when there's reorganization of lots of our memories.
Oh, absolutely. In our sleep processes, the deep sleep and the REM sleep are when we are reorganizing our memories. So typically that's how you're organizing the memories for the day.
Yeah.
And in a sense, your library type memories, they become plastic again during those sleep times.
Okay.
And therefore it's possible that you can actually change them during the sleep process.
Yeah.
So that's one hypothesis.
I like that one.
It's a good hypothesis.
So when I go to a new supermarket, when I'm looking for the frozen peas and the frozen broccoli and the green tea and so on, the first time I go, I'm looking everywhere, working really hard at it. The 10th time I go, I can go straight there and throw those things in my basket without thinking. I can be on the phone, I've been talking to someone else. So it's during REM sleep that all of those processes that I would have to go through manually, working hard, become automatic and programmed. It's during my REM sleep, that the night after I've been at that supermarket, that's when that gets consolidated, I think.
Well, there's the deep sleep and there's the REM sleep. Those are the two different forms of sleep. The deep sleep, you're lying there completely inert, if you see what I mean. And then the REM sleep is much closer to being waking. It's, again, this is an area of active research, but it's thought that some of your hippocampal memories, which is probably more those spatial memory things, those are what captures. Those get consolidated in deep sleep, and your procedural memories.
Okay. So if it's cerebellum, it's procedural, and it's REM sleep.
Probably.
Okay. So we're at the bleeding edge of research here.
Absolutely, yes.
But if it's hippocampal memories, which is kind of more factual and spatial, where things actually are, then that's consolidated during our deep sleep.
Yeah, these are your consciously available memories.
Yeah,
it's thought. I mean, again, this is all recent.
That's lovely stuff.
This is all very recent stuff. That at the end of the day, just before going to sleep, somehow the brain works out the gist of the things that have been happening to you during the day.
Right.
And then somehow it then takes those from your hippocampus, where they're stored during the day, and puts them into your longer term storage.
Right.
The sort of the gist. It links them all up. It's like a sort of a computer sort of being updated.
Yeah.
And then of course, at the start of the next day after you sleep, your hippocampus is free to take in the next lot. If you see what I mean, it's like your RAM is now free.
Yeah,
whereas the sea has come across and wiped away all of the sandcastles that you built the day before in your RAM, and it's put them somewhere safe.
So, piecing together these tools, you helped me add neuroplasticity to this process and take the vital elements of bilateral stimulation of EMDR and piece it together with neuroplasticity. Is your hunch that theoretically should work much better?
Well, the other theory one of many other theories for the way that the EMDR works is based on the idea of brain networks.
Right.
And the idea of brain networks has really come of age in the last 20 odd years. There's a thing called the default mode network, which is what happens when you're not doing anything else.
Yeah.
A lot of your brain networks are active, so you'll have attentional networks and motor networks and things. But the default mode network is a bit like your operating system.
Oh, right, yeah.
Where with your iPhone,
Yeah.
Nothing is happening. It's just scanning around.
Yeah.
See whether it's
Just checking up on things.
have they said anything? Has the mouse been pressed? Has Siri been asked, etc.
Somebody trying to ring you.
Exactly. But most of the time, it's just sitting there doing nothing, idling.
Yeah.
But it turns out it's not idling. It's doing all sorts of things that we're not aware of. And it's thought that maybe that's what's triggering the PTSD symptoms, that from time to time it comes up, oh, good grief, am I in that unpleasant situation again?
Hmm.
And it's thought that maybe what the EMDR is doing is actually sort of reconfiguring your default mode network, so it doesn't have this little glitch in it.
Yeah.
It just sort of it's put that memory away properly to bed,
Right.
rather than having it sort of sitting there glitch-like. And so, in a sense, it's tidied up your operating system, and I think that's a very nice idea, that you can actually tidy up your operating system by use of this EMDR. And of course, if you think about the EMDR, what's happening is you might have bilateral stimulation. That means both hemispheres of your brain are stimulated. Think about the nice things. That's actually getting your semantic memory stimulated.
Yeah.
Thinking about the nasty thing, that's this thing that you're trying to get rid of. All of these areas of your brain or regions are coactive.
Yeah.
They're active at the same time. And that's the trigger, in a sense, for integrating those networks, having the things active at the same time. And therefore, once they get triggered, then it's thought that maybe that particular adverse experience one gets put away properly.
Wow, that's huge, Phil, because in school children today, I'm a board member of the Reach Institute in America, which is all about helping children that are struggling with various things at school. And the proportion of children, particularly since COVID lockdown, proportion of children that are struggling with high levels of anxiety, first of all, that's horrible in its own. But when you've got high levels of anxiety, your brain is full of cortisol and so on, you just simply can't learn. So it's a double negative problem for these children. So what we're talking about, hopefully it will lead to more sophisticated programs that can transform this. It's not just children. 1 in 5 or 6 women in certain parts of America are on high doses of antidepressants and so on. This is a big problem, and people don't believe that there's a solution to it because they've tried so many things and still suffering from it. One of the things you've helped me focus on is piecing together the programs that we've got to create neuroplasticity with things like bilateral stimulation or EMDR. Early results show that when you combine these two things together, neuroplasticity plus known processes that have an effectiveness, it seems to make them even more effective. And tying that back to shame, what we're now finding is that there's no need for people to talk about whatever it is that's caused them shame, if shame is a part of the trauma. This whole process is so clever, it can press the reset button regardless. And that's thrilling hope for humanity. To me, it's so powerful and so transformational. So we've got all sorts of research going on right now with war veterans and others that I'm hoping will lead to wonderful relief and release for people going forward.
Absolutely. So Jeremy Schmarman has his cerebellar cognitive affective syndrome, where he says that the cerebellum is a key part of the affective, that is the emotional circuitry. Yeah. Trauma is part of the emotional circuitry. Yeah. The amygdala is the key structure, which is, of course, joined, as are all brain structures, to the cerebellum very, very, very smoothly. And therefore, you would expect that on sort of principal grounds, that some sort of thing which was affecting the cerebellar circuitry could, in principle, also affect the affective circuitry. And anything that involves neuroplasticity enhancement will, in a sense, accelerate whatever intervention you have. Yeah, because that's what happens. The brain is more amenable to being changed in that way. And therefore, you would expect that it would also have an effect on the affective, especially the traumatic findings. So, yes, on grounds of principle, you would expect it to be effective. And I look forward to being able to comment on proper studies of this type, which need to be done, don't they?
Yeah, well, these need the fMRI type studies where you can actually see what's happening in the brain. But it's clear that there's all sorts of interactive things happening. We've covered in these two parts of this podcast. First, we talked about the way the capacity of the brain, the capability of the brain was reduced if the cerebellum wasn't doing its job properly, and what can be done to address that and make a huge difference. Now we're talking about the impact of adverse experiences, either during childhood or maybe even before that in pregnancy, or things transferred from previous generations. There's all sorts of reasons why we have complicated and negative things happening in our emotions. And now we're talking about piecing all of this together and saying, how can we increase our speed of learning, increase our mental resilience, because that's transformational. So what we've talked about so far, I think, is huge, huge hope for humanity. Does it need more research? Yes. Is it working now? Yes. Are there downsides to what we're playing with? No. I'm not experiencing and watching anyone going backwards, and lots of people seem to be making steady hope forward. So all this comes back to the research you've been doing over the last 30 years, in my knowledge, and I can't thank you enough. I've got a daughter that reads and writes today, and I almost certainly would not have been alive had it not been from you. So the impact in my own family has been enormous, and I've watched it. I've worked with over 50,000 people and applied these principles with lots of folks. So I'm positive about the future, Professor Nicolson. I don't know about you.
Oh, it beats the alternative, doesn't it? The world is changing at an accelerating rate.
Yeah.
We need to be able to adapt to that change. Evolution endowed us with terrific neuroplasticity, which allows us to adapt to our environment, especially over the first 2 years, where we learn our native language.
Yeah.
Then you get neural commitment, so that stuff gets sort of hard-baked.
Yeah.
And then we still have lots of plasticity left. And then we have plasticity again, which is actually genetically programmed for our adolescent years, which gets us a lot of social learning aspects.
Yeah.
For women, there's neuroplasticity genetically programmed in pregnancy.
Yeah.
So the brain is designed to change in pregnancy to adapt to that situation. But after the age of, shall we say, 40,
there's very little.
Evolution expected us to be dead.
Yeah. That's pretty drastic.
Yeah. I mean, we're of no value.
Yeah.
And therefore, from the age of 40 plus, there are no sort of intrinsic neuroplasticity processes. And therefore, we have to enhance those processes by whatever means that we can in order to age effectively and gracefully.
Yeah.
But even 20-year-olds need to adapt to rapidly changing circumstances.
Yeah. So getting rid of the limitations of underdevelopment of the cerebellum, getting rid of the limitations caused by previous traumatic experiences, giving me triggers that puts me into fight or flight, and combining all of that with neuroplasticity means we've got to rethink what our brains are capable of. We can rethink how fast I can learn, how ready I am, and how fast I can adapt to what you're describing as an increasingly rapidly changing world. That's exciting.
We can cheat evolution by enhancing our our neuroplasticity and hence creativity at any age.
Yeah.
And doing so will allow everybody to adapt to the rapidly changing circumstances in London.
So I'm excited about artificial intelligence, and all of the focus right now is on artificial intelligence, and how much we talk about natural intelligence is almost zero at the moment. Shouldn't we change that so that we become equally as excited about what we can do with our own brains as well as what artificial intelligence is going to do for every aspect of the modern world.
Oh, absolutely. Natural intelligence is what we have control over.
And it's how we feel about ourselves too. So our confidence, our skill ability, our ability to earn and communicate and develop relationships and so on.
Yes, and the way to do this is by setting ourselves challenges.
Yeah.
At any age.
Yeah.
Challenges that we succeed in, ideally.
Yeah.
And methods of actually improving our ability to succeed.
Yeah. Well, everything you've taught me and are still teaching me even today, I've got a team that's actually building all of those into totally personalized programs, because your brain is very different to mine and is different to everybody else that's listening. Fortunately, yeah. So these programs have to be totally personalized, but they're totally natural. There is no need for medication in this process. You can actually do all of the things you need to do to create the neuroplasticity, to develop the cerebellum, to deal with the consequences of adverse childhood or adult events, the traumas that have happened to us. So all of these programs, I've not found any downside to them, but huge potential upside. And we want to work with more and more people so that this becomes more generally known. So thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for what you've shared today. Really, really, it's awesome stuff. You deserve every respect. You have it from me. I want you to have it from the world. The stuff that you've done for this world will change humanity. So thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you, Wynford. I think everything is just so exciting, the opportunities that are opening up. And we just need to get across the idea that it is possible at any age to actually transform your ability to do things.
Yeah. Well, thank you for listening. I hope you're more excited about the future than ever you were before the start of these two podcasts. So don't be surprised if we pick up on more topics soon.